Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burckhardt. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is January 24th, 2024, and we are coming up on the last few Best of Book Banter with Dianne Burckhardt, the Book Talk podcast episodes, before we begin our season 3. And oh my goodness, is season 3 going to just be amazing. We have already finished all of the interviews that are going to be coming to you through January and March and have started booking new authors to pick up in April and beyond. You are going to just love the variety that is coming to you. Now, don't forget, February 1st, we also have our February-March issue of Book Banter Magazine, where we will feature the authors who are part of our Love Fest for the beginning of season 3. We have got romance authors from mild to very hot and spicy, to authors who write about lost love, how to have self-love, and we also have a few poets to bring you. But for today, let's get on with our best of episode with Chef Michele Di Pietro. We talk about her book, SOUPified. It is absolutely amazing. I can tell you from personal experience, I have tried a number of recipes from her cookbook, and I have not found one yet that I did not love. They are so easy to follow. The food is so good. It's just amazing. And there's no crazy ingredients that you cannot find in your local store or in your cupboard. So give it a try. You will not regret it. If you want to try out a few of her recipes before you buy the book, you can go onto her website where she has so many recipes that she offers up for free. And if you love her work, send her a note, catch her on Instagram, or drop her an email. She loves to hear from her fans. And she always responds. She's absolutely amazing. So let's bring her back to the show. Please welcome the amazing chef and cookbook author, Michele Di Pietro. Can you please tell our listening audience who you are and what you do?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. My name is Michele Di Pietro, and I am the founder of Manja with Michele, where I love to inspire people to cook with and enjoy the flavors of the Italian and Italian-American tables. I am a trained chef and culinary consultant. I've been in the food service industry for, well over 20 years. And in 2020, when a lot of my clients kind of dried up, I wrote my first cookbook. So I am also a cookbook author, which is why you and I were introduced to each other.
Exactly. It's like, and I have to tell you, after looking through your recipes on your website and through your cookbook, I am so hungry.
So I've done my job well.
Oh my God. Yes. They look fabulous. I did not see a single recipe. I'm like, no, I don't think I want to try that one. Every single one, I'm like, ooh, I got to do that. Ooh, we got to try that. My husband would love that. I mean, it was just again and again with every recipe that I looked at.
Well, that's great. That makes me happy.
Now, you did not start out your business career in the food industry.
I did not. You are very, very correct. I actually was an accounting major at college, and my first job was for one of the, at the time, big 6 public accounting firms. I got the big job in New York City after graduation, and I was an auditor, and I became a CPA, certified public accountant, 2 years in, once passed the exam and fulfilled all the requirements. And I did that for about 5 years, both in New York City and in Switzerland, Geneva, Switzerland. I had a 2-year exchange. So that was where I started out my professional career.
So how do you make a transition from being a certified public accountant to chef?
It's not an obvious connection, is it? Well, I grew up in a traditional Italian American family in southern New Jersey, and I was surrounded by food, and I had a stay-at-home mom who cooked a lot, and Italian grandmothers and aunts. So I started cooking at a very young age. I think presumably because I love to eat. I always loved to cook. So I always cooked. I always enjoyed cooking. I always enjoyed being in the kitchen. I loved going grocery shopping with my mom. But I was also very into academics. So I never really considered going into food as a career, until many, many years later when I was in a career I wasn't that happy with. But I was very much into academics. I went to college and I kind of had an affinity for numbers. I was interested in business and finance and financial consulting, sort of that area. And so I became an accounting major because I liked it. I was good at it. I knew I could get a job after graduation, which was important when I knew I was going to graduate with lots of loans.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a big deal for me and my family. Like I got a really great job after graduation. I moved to New York City, which was like a big deal. And it was awesome. And I was like, wow, here I am, 22, with a great job in New York City. And I did, at the time, all the right things. I took the CPA exam. I had a subscription to the Wall Street Journal because I felt like I should, even though I never read a page of it, but people would come to visit me in New York City. And it was a joke. Like, instead of going to the museums, I would take them to my favorite gourmet food store. I'm like, you got to check this out. Like, look at all this prepared foods, or look at all these ingredients, or look at this awesome Italian food store. And I was obsessed with the idea of prepared foods. This is before it was everywhere. But, I was working in the field. I remember like a couple years into it, though, I did actually go on a tour of the French Culinary Institute, which was in Manhattan, but I was too immature to make that decision. Plus, I had all these loans from college, and you don't go to a school like Georgetown and then turn around and tell your parents a couple years into your first job, I'm thinking about going to school, Mom and Dad. Like, I was not prepared to have that conversation with my Italian American parents. But I did realize at some point, hey, I'm working for an international company with offices all over the world. And I learned that they had an international exchange program. So I went in one Monday morning and I spoke with my contact there. And I said, I'm interested in applying for the international exchange program, and I want to go to Milan. And I thought, of course, I want to go to Italy. I had been studying Italian recreationally at the time. I also had studied it in college, and Milan was the business center of Europe. So they came back to me a few months later and they said, well, we don't have something for you in Milan, but we do have a position at your level in Geneva, Switzerland. And my first thought was, oh my God, what language do they speak there? Which was French. And I didn't know a word of French. When I did go to an immersion, but in the long run, it didn't matter because I was working completely in English with other expats from the US, Britain, Australia, et cetera. So and I want to mention that because being in Switzerland for 2 years, even though I was not in the food industry at the time, being in Europe was such a life-defining experience for me. From a maturity and adventure kind of standpoint, but also just being completely surrounded by a food culture and having the opportunity to travel. Oh, yeah. It's like a crazy amount of travel around Western Europe and other parts of Europe as well. And just realizing how important food was to the culture there. And I just got more and more comfortable with it. And I knew that I was ready to make the move. So at the end of the 2 years of my time in Switzerland, I moved back to the US. I quit my job, and I was expected to go back and continue working in the New York office, but I quit my job, moved back in with my parents in Southern New Jersey, and enrolled in cooking school in Philadelphia. And I never looked back. And at the time, I knew restaurants were not my calling. I had never worked professionally at that point at all in the food industry. I had just worked recreationally, and I was a home cook. And I wanted to combine my business background with food. I wasn't sure exactly what I would do. I thought maybe I would own my own gourmet food store or Italian specialty food store one day. Because like I said, I was obsessed with the idea of prepared foods. But that's kind of like loosely what I thought by going to cooking school. I also thought it was just the best way to get into the industry and make connections. So I went to cooking school and I loved it. I would literally jump out of bed. I mean, granted, I was a lot younger. I would jump out of bed and I would be there so early. I would get there so early, and I was on cooking competitions. I helped out guest chefs. I did everything. I mean, I always used to say, if I could just go to cooking school over again, I would do it because it was just so fun. And so I didn't go and open my own gourmet food store. I did work in restaurants for a short amount of time because I had to. But I did end up working in the retail food industry, and I started working in the prepared foods department at a small company, which you may have heard of, called Whole Foods Market. At the time, I mean, it wasn't what it is now, but it was just starting to get into the New Jersey area more or less around that time. And that's sort of how I did it. I basically did a complete 180, and I went from public accounting, quit my job, went to cooking school, and just forged ahead. And it worked out, fortunately.
That's an incredible leap of faith for your future. I mean, so many people would say, okay, I've already got this secure job. I can make good money. I'm just going to stay here, even though I don't like it.
Right.
Because there's that safety. But you took a huge leap.
Absolutely. I know I did. I think about it a lot. Like, wow. But I remember thinking at the time, I'm 27 years old. I have a lot more years of working. I have 35 more years of working. I have a lot of time to do something else. I can't do this for that long. I can't even be in this field. Okay, a lot of people left public accounting, but they would go to work for other sort of similar companies under that financial umbrella. but I just knew I had to do something completely different. I guess what let me make that decision was I thought that, okay, I have this business background. I have this really strong accounting background. So I have something to fall back on, A, but B, it will combine well with whatever I end up doing in the food industry. It'll just complement it.
Yeah.
And it did.
It's not like you're not going to be using that information when you're running your own business.
Right. And, I ended up really, after a few years of being in operations and some other parts of the industry, I ended up really focusing on the recipe development and the concept development and the creative culinary development side of the industry, which actually is a lot of math. Like, okay, it's not calculus, but it is a lot of numbers. And it really did help me in terms of being able to develop recipes really quickly. Turns out I had an affinity for that. And I also realized that I'm completely right-brained and left-brained. Like I could be extremely practical because I was putting together a lot of big regional and national programs for my company eventually, once I had been with the company for a while. And I was extremely organized and practical. And I had a lot of that skill set from being a CPA and an auditor. Detail reigned king, and you had to be very detailed and on top of what you were doing. I wasn't just this loosey-goosey creative person.
Speaking of being creative, though, you did work doing menu development and you were also a culinary director. I mean, that had to take a lot of creativity to put together whole menus and to design programs for corporations.
Absolutely. And that was my favorite part of the job. I loved brainstorming and creating ideas for recipes, ideas for menus, putting the recipes together, testing the recipes, putting the menus together. That was my favorite part. A lot more goes on, though, besides that. So that was like the beginning, but I had to work cross-functionally within the organization, working with marketing, different departments, construction, really like whatever was needed. But yes, it absolutely encompassed a lot and I loved it all. But to this day, my favorite job is still sitting here and just brainstorming creative ways of presenting food. And we used to joke at Whole Foods. We used to say, innovation is a 4-letter word because it was jammed down our throat. You can't even imagine. Like there was a lot of internal competition within the company amongst the regions. I think a lot has changed since I left, but every region was always vying to be the first to do something innovative on the culinary side of things, which fell under what I did. So looking at foods in a different way and trying to come up with new and innovative ways of doing recipes and menus was always part of my job. So fast forward, that's really the undertone of what my first cookbook was all about, SOUPified. It's about looking at recipes and looking at foods in a different way.
I was going to say, that is a perfect segue for your cookbook.
Yes, for sure.
So tell us about that.
I wrote SOUPified, Soups Inspired by Your Favorite Dishes. I started writing it in April of 2020, and we all know what was happening then.
Yeah.
So I was working as a culinary consultant. I had just landed a huge client that was going to be great in terms of keeping me busy. Because as an independent consultant, I'm sure you can imagine you have peaks and valleys in terms of how busy you are. And sometimes it takes a while to land a big client. And I did, and this job was going to be great. Well, March of 2020 comes and the whole project just goes away. Oh. So there I am in my 1-bedroom apartment with no outdoor space in New York City with no clients really, and not even a website yet for my other brand, Manja with Michele. So I was chatting with a friend who lives in Texas, who's also in the food and travel business. And we're like, yeah, maybe we should work on an ebook. And I'm like, yeah, I should work on an ebook. I didn't know what an ebook was. I just thought like, oh, I guess it's like a PDF of recipes that I could put together on Microsoft Word and eventually sell on my website, which again, didn't exist yet at that point. I'm thinking like, 10, 12 recipes. And the idea for SOUPified just sort of came up organically because in my ongoing quest to develop recipes and put them out on my social media channels, Manja with Michele, I had developed a couple soups early in 2020 and at the end of 2019 that were soup versions of regular dishes. One was a soup version of a pasta dish, which is actually a Sardinian pasta dish, which didn't make it to the cookbook, called Malaredis alla Campidinese. It's a pasta dish. It's like these tiny gnocchi looking pastas in a saffron tomato sausage sauce. And I had done a soup version of that, which was amazing. And then in early 2020, I had all this eggplant one day and I'm like, I'm going to make an eggplant soup. And it ended up being like an eggplant tahini soup, which is a pureed soup. And I'm like, you know what? This is really like a baba ganoush soup. Oh, and nice. So then I'm like, oh, wait, there's two. I'm like, kind of quickly came up with some other ideas. I'm like, this is a great idea. And the first thing I did was make sure there's no other cookbook out there already that has a collection like this. And there wasn't. So I thought, okay, well, let me come up with a good solid like 12, 15 recipes. Well, once I brainstormed and I came up with like 115 ideas,
Oh,
because
wow.
that's exactly how my mind works. So what started out as just kind of an ebook and worked on one recipe at a time. And this is something that I ended up self-publishing, and I took all the photos with my iPhone
Oh, wow.
and styled everything myself. I mean, actually everything I did myself with the exception of designing the book. One step at a time. One thing happened, another thing happened. I still was like developing recipes. I still had no intention of it ever being a printed book, but maybe sometime in May or June even, someone had said to me like, oh, Michelle, there are these services out there that are print on demand. And I'm like, oh, what's that? So kind of looked into it. And really not until I was done with the bulk of the recipes come August or something did I really even look into the details of print on demand and what was involved. And it's a great concept for someone like me who really wanted to get a cookbook out there, but didn't have the big publishing deal. And being that we were in this very unique kind of situation in 2020, this was all I was working on, more or less, during that time. So I started working on the cookbook in April, and I released it right after Thanksgiving in 2020. It really was the best thing that came out of the pandemic for me. Because as a culinary professional, you always want to write a cookbook. It's always on your mind. It's something that I thought about 20, 30 years prior. But, I let life and work get in the way. I had a big major job for most of my career. I didn't have time to write a cookbook. I didn't know anything about writing a cookbook. I had no idea what was involved. But I'm a chef, right? I'm a chef that loves to develop recipes. So I describe myself as a cook who also writes, as opposed to a writer who dabbles in recipes.
I tell you, I'm still reeling from the fact that you said that you took these photos with your iPhone, because the photos that I've seen from your cookbook are amazing. They're so detailed.
Well,
the lighting is perfect.
Yes, thank you. I mean, of course, I look at them a little differently, and I look at them like, wow, I can really tell that was one of the earlier photos, because I do feel like my food styling got like so much better by the end. Because again, I was in food service, I was a culinary director, but I was not on the marketing team. Everything I did was behind the scenes. We had another team to make everything look pretty.
Oh, yeah.
But here I am now doing it all myself. But it was great, so eventually my idea for 12 became a cookbook of 31 recipes. I figured one for every day of the month. And it turned into a full cookbook of SOUPified recipes. And SOUPify, it's a word that I kind of came up with for this book. In fact, my sister was the one that helped me come up with the idea. And I actually define it in the book as if it's in a dictionary. What is SOUPify? Well, SOUPify is a verb, means to make into soup, make liquid and be able to eat with a spoon. So the idea behind SOUPified was to take some of the classic favorite recipes out there, comfort food recipes, and turn them into soup. And this collection has never been done before in a cookbook. So it has recipes in there, range from vegetarian ideas, from like eggplant parm soup, garlic bread soup, spinach quiche soup, baba ganoush soup, to seafood soups like shrimp scampi or crab cake soup. You have chicken soups, chicken marsala soup, chicken piccata soup, chicken burrito soup. You have bacon cheeseburger soup, lasagna soup that have beef in it. And then, of course, you have some pork soups like sausage and pepper soup, Chinese egg roll soup, which is actually one of my favorite ones in the whole cookbook. And then, of course, there's some chilled soups. And each recipe is really focused on the underlying dish. So I wanted to choose recipes that I was able to translate into like a spoonable form, where I was able to pull out the flavors from the underlying dish and turn them into a soup. And it worked out great. And in 2020, everything was about comfort food. People were home, they were cooking. Mm-hmm. So I would say that this cookbook was really inspired by the comfort food theme of that time. I tell people, these are not the chicken pastinas of the world. These are hearty, stick to your ribs kind of soups. These are soups that are a meal. These are the soups that you don't pair with a steak.
Yeah.
This is all you're eating. And, while my brand Manja with Michele is focused on Italian and Italian-American recipes and innovative ways of presenting and enjoying the flavors of the Italian table, this is not an Italian-American cookbook. This is a soup cookbook. However, my Italian-American roots absolutely come through. But you'll see in the selections, or just even in like the commentary. So I think it's a great representation of where I was at that time.
Now, is the cookbook how you ended up meeting, I'm going to end up saying her name wrong, I just know it, Adriana
Trigiani, who's amazing. Yes. Actually, it's funny because on the marketing side of things, at some point I put together, okay, who am I going to send my cookbook to? Mm-hmm. My Manja with Michele spoon, and, to help me promote the book, which is what you do as influencers. You send it out to other influencers and other people in the industry. And I followed Adriana Trigiani. I thought she was super cool. I first learned about her in listening to the Italian American podcast like years earlier. And I had read a couple of her books and I knew she had this live show. And she used to do these lives every week on Facebook. So I messaged her on Instagram and I said, basically, can I send you my cookbook? And I thought she was going to be like many of the other celebrities who I emailed and just completely ignore me. But she got back to me right away, like, yeah, I would love it. Please send it to. And she gives me her home address. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah. Wow.
I can't believe someone actually gave me their home address. And it was between that and coincidentally, and I didn't even know this was happening, another one of my contacts who's in the Italian American food creation community in Brooklyn, she's friends with Adriana Trigiani. And separately, unbeknownst to me, she had just said to her, oh, you should reach out to Michele Di Pietro. She just wrote this great cookbook, blah, blah, blah. So I think it was those two things came together. I'll never forget the day I got an email from someone on Adriana's team and I was like so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I was just invited to be on Adriana's live show, which was fantastic. And then I got invited again. And then I got invited again. So I actually was on her show like 3 times in a matter of 2 years.
Now, I actually saw a photo of you and her and somebody else.
Rocco DiSpirito?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Over time, as I became more immersed in the Italian American community after starting Mangia with Michele, one of my other contacts, who is a Brooklyn-based author, his name is Andrew Cotto, and he's written a lot of novels, and a few of them are based in Italy. We met each other on Instagram, eventually became friends in real life. He became the new editor-in-chief of Italian America, which is a printed magazine for the Order of Sons and Daughters of Italy and America, which is the largest Italian American organization in the US. And he brought me on board to do the food column, basically be the food editor for this magazine, which is, again, a quarterly publication. One of the earlier issues that we were both involved in had Adriana Trigiani on the cover because she was the featured person for that issue. So we, as kind of a celebration of that, and also she just wanted to celebrate the Sons of Italy magazine as a whole, she invited us to her house for a dinner, which I actually cooked.
Oh, nice.
So it was great. And I had some help with it. But basically, I cooked some of the recipes that were in that edition. And Rocco DiSpirito was there. I'm also a fan of his. He's a big Italian-American celebrity chef here in the US. That was super fun.
What was it like cooking for another chef?
Very scary. For sure, I was nervous because, he's just so well known. But he walks in, the first thing he does is he comes over to the stove, which is where I was mixing a sauce or whatever. And he says something in Italian and he immediately put me at ease.
That's nice.
It was fun. It was actually a small group. We had a great time, even though I had been on Adriana Trigiani's show 3 times by that point. So we had met virtually. We had never met in real life. And she was just as I imagined her. It was great.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
This is a point of the show where we like to do 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but we're still going to do it anyway. And as the holidays are approaching, I actually have tacked on a bonus question at the end.
Oh boy.
Are you ready?
And I know that I am very chatty, so I'm sure these will not be quick, but yes, I am ready.
Don't worry, nobody's quick. Question 1. What is the one must-have appliance in any good kitchen?
An immersion blender, also known as a hand blender. It's the one that you hold in your hand, put it in a pot of soup or a pot of sauce, and you just turn it on and you kind of move it around the pot. And I talk about that in my cookbook. There's a whole section on immersion blenders and how important they are. If you're going to make soup or sauces, you want this. You're going to come across eventually something that you want to puree. And the last thing you want to do is take a pot of hot soup and then transfer all of the ingredients into a blender while it's hot and then blend it and then put it back into the pot.
Yeah.
You just use this immersion blender and it's beautiful. I have one that, gosh, I'm sure it's well over 20 years old. Everybody should get one. It's funny, back in the early Whole Foods days when I was in the professional kitchen working, when we used to make soups in the store and we had these really big pieces of equipment called a tilt skillet. So imagine like something you stand in front of and you saute and it's just like huge. And I was making soup in there once and I had this really big, and we're talking, it's probably about, probably about 4 feet long version of an immersion blender. We called it a burr mixer. And I'm very young in the industry. This might have even been the very first time I ever used this piece of equipment. I don't even remember, but I'm like pureeing some kind of soup and oops, I dropped the whole thing into the soup, Meanwhile, it's plugged into the wall.
Oh no.
And it's such an expensive piece of equipment and I messed it up. It broke.
Oh,
and I was mortified. I'm like, oh my God. oh my God, what am I going to do here? So fished it out of the soup as quickly as I could before I realized like, oh my God, something electrical is like, this might not be a good idea, but I fished it out as soon as I could. And we had to get it repaired. And I don't know, it cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So that was fun.
But you know, the point of things like that is as an adult, you have a great story to tell people.
Sure. I mean, see, here I am. I didn't know I was going to be on Book Banter all these years. Fast forward. So despite my early trauma with, the professional immersion blender, I still think it's the best piece of equipment for any home cook to own.
So question 2, what is the hardest part about coming up with a new recipe?
This is not that hard for me, but I think it still is a challenge, is presenting the recipe in a way that is the most simple and can easily be understood and executed by the average home cook, making sure that I don't make assumptions because I am a professional chef and there's things that I often assume that people know, but making sure that I don't lean on that and that everything that is important is in the recipe. Everything that everyone needs to know is in the recipe. So all those details that professional chefs might take for granted, but also present in a way that's not technical, that is very easily understood, and also just creating the recipe in the most easily executable way possible. And I try to do that with everything. I do mention that in the cookbook and in my recipes on the website. I might say like, there are other ways that you can do this, but this is the easiest way. And for the most part, you're not going to notice any difference in the two different ways of doing things. For example, cooking rice or pasta in the soup itself. A lot of people would be against that. And I don't always do that, but I have presented my recipes in my cookbook to just cook everything as much as possible in the pot. So it's less work for the person who is doing it at home. And I will take into account the amount of liquid that goes into that soup needs to be increased because I'm cooking this product, this starch in the soup. Does that make sense?
As somebody who is a home cook who is trying to follow along with recipes from cookbooks, I appreciate that effort that you put in.
Great. Good.
Question 3. What do you think is the biggest misconception about Italian food?
That regional Italian food from Italy and Italian American food are supposed to be the same thing. And Italian American food, and often my recipes are criticized a lot by Italians in Italy that feel that you should not be making something if it is not made that way in Italy. And hey, I have traveled to Italy many, many times. I was a purist for most of my culinary life. But the truth is, we need to be accepting of change and innovation that comes over time. Even putting that aside, Italian American cuisine was born of immigrants in the early turn of the century, and it became what it is because of what they had available at that time and because of how the circumstances changed from maybe being like really, really poor peasants and farmers and having a better life in America. So they were able to work with different ingredients and maybe do a little bit more with meat or cheeses or whatever that they wouldn't have done back home. And there's a misconception that Italian American food is less of a cuisine than Italian food because it's so different. But it is different. Italian American cuisine is a different cuisine than regional Italian. And I love them both. And I don't appreciate the criticism that goes on out there of one over the other, like one is better than the other one because. One
of the things that I've definitely learned living in a couple of different foreign countries now is that you also have to adjust according to what is available.
Yes.
Because we have had to adapt so many recipes that I grew up with in the United States and my husband grew up with in Chile because he's from Chile. We've had to adapt them here to what is available in Germany to make these things. We try to get as close as we can, but we can't get as close as what we made at home because those ingredients aren't available near us.
Yeah, for sure that. And then sometimes you just might want to do it a little differently anyway.
Definitely.
And that's okay.
Question 4.
Yes.
What is one dish of yours that when somebody says, I want to try your recipes, what's the first one that you always tell people to try?
Wow, that's a really great question. And I don't know if there's one dish because so much depends on what mood I'm in at that time or what season it is. Or
well, how about this? Since we're focusing on your SOUPified cookbook, if somebody says, I want to make one recipe out of your cookbook, what's the first one they should make?
I usually say chicken marsala or lasagna soup. And those two, while being very different from each other, they're both like really great representations of what a SOUPified soup is. They really embody the underlying dish, which is the whole point of a SOUPified recipe, to be as close as possible to the underlying dish, with all the textures and flavors and nuances of flavor profiles included.
And I tell you, we've talked about the lasagna recipe enough that I think we're going to have to do that this weekend. Because I just keep thinking about it. Now, question 5. What is your favorite soup? If it's a cold day and you want to make some comfort food for you, what's your go-to?
If it's a cold day and I'm going to make something for me, it's going to be a brothy soup because I actually prefer brothy soups. And it might be something as simple as, you know what? It's probably escarole soup, which is not in the book because it's not a SOUPified soup, but it would be something like a greens and beans soup, which is escarole and white beans, or maybe I'll throw in little meatballs to make it more like an Italian wedding soup, which is a recipe I do have on my website, by the way. But I love bitter greens in soup. I love broth with a lot of greens, whether it's escarole or spinach. Sometimes I'll puree it if I'm in the mood, or sometimes I'll leave it chunky, but it would probably be something like that. And depending on how hungry I am, I might put some chicken in there or mini meatballs, like I said. And I will always top it off with some grated Pecorino Romano cheese and a little drizzle of really good extra virgin olive oil, because that's how I roll.
Now, the bonus question, since we're heading into the holiday gift giving season for so many major holidays, what is your best suggestion for somebody for a gift to get for the chef in their life? Besides your cookbook. I mean, your cookbook should be number 1.
No, I think the best gift would be a bottle of really, really high quality, extra virgin, first cold pressed olive oil.
Ooh, yeah.
You know, and I have actually started bringing olive oil, like the kind that I just described, to the times that I get invited to people's houses for dinner, but I bring olive oil instead of wine.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody brings wine and most people don't know how to buy olive oil. Mm-hmm. They might not actually know what constitutes a great olive oil. You know, I've had so many great olive oils in my life, but there's one that I especially love, which is a Tuscan brand. And, you know, you taste a couple different olive oils, you taste a good one, you taste an average one, and you'll be able to tell the difference.
Oh, definitely.
So, yeah, I think that's a great gift. I think it is a gift because it can be a little bit of a treat, you know, a little bit of a splurge to get a really great bottle of olive oil.
Oh, most definitely. I can tell you that if any guest ever came to my house and brought me a bottle of really good olive oil as a gift, they would be the first name on the next guest list.
Absolutely. Because you know you're going to use that. Everyone's going to use olive oil. Everyone uses oil. It's not like it's not going to be used. Like wine, you know, wine's very subjective. People may not like it or may not drink that much, or they might get, you know, multiple bottles when people come over. No one else is bringing olive oil to someone's house.
Oh, I love that answer. That was so good. And of course, the second thing that they should also tack with that is your cookbook.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. SOUPified. It's great. We're in soup season, although I think soup season is all year round, but these recipes are especially great during the colder weather.
Now, where can people find you and your cookbook?
Well, the best place would be my website, which is mangiawithmichele.com. Mangia being the Italian word for eat. So it's MANGIA with Michele, and that's Michele with 1 L, MICHELE. Everything is on that website, including links to my cookbook and all my swag. I've got a certain line of great Cucina-inspired designs, which include t-shirts, mugs, and lots of different products. And I'm constantly creating more recipes to add to my website. In fact, I just published one last night. Or you can also just search for SOUPified, soups inspired by your favorite dishes online, and you'll find it available on lots of different online retailers.
And I think one thing that all of the listeners will be really happy to know about is you are also going to be featured in Book Banter Magazine for November with a recipe from your cookbook. And you're also going to be in the year-end book buying guide with another SOUPified inspired recipe that our listeners can make.
Yes, and thank you so much for that.
We're also going to be featuring some of your great warm hoodie and sweatshirt swag in the November issue. So that people are looking for comfy clothes to wear while having comfort food, they can definitely go to Mangia with Michele and get loaded up for everything.
Yes, thank you. Definitely lots of great gift ideas.
This has been fabulous. You were so much fun to talk to.
You too. Thank you.
Is there anything that you want people to know about you that we haven't talked about?
I think you've covered a lot. You know, I just want to thank you. I just want to thank you again for inviting me on your wonderful podcast. I had a great time chatting with you. And If anyone ever has any questions about any of the recipes in my cookbook or in my website, I love receiving emails from everybody and I reply to everything. And if you're not an email person, look for me on social media under Manja with Michele on Facebook and Instagram, and I will always reply to your message.
And all of your contact information is going to be in the description of the podcast that goes along with this episode so that people can just click and go and find you.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much.
So there you have it, folks. The incredible chef and cookbook author, Michele Di Pietro. Now, if you like author swag, she is another fantastic author to check out. Go to her website. She has got t-shirts. She's got sweatshirts. She has home goods. There is something for everyone. And you can even find the olive oil that we were talking about that she recommends. You can buy it directly from her. So check it out. She is wonderful. She is a fantastic person to support, and she appreciates all of the attention that her work gets. She really strives to try and give the absolute best products for those who follow her, and I cannot endorse her enough. Not only is she a great chef and puts out a fantastic cookbook, she's just a really good person. No kidding. Behind the scenes, she is just as friendly and fun as she was on the podcast. So go check out her work. She's somebody fantastic to support. And speaking of somebody else to support, don't forget to come back next week for our last Best of Book Banter with Dianne Burckhardt, the Book Talk Podcast, Season 2 Holiday Break episode. Ooh, that's a lot to say. We are featuring the best of episode with Sagit Schwartz as we talk about her debut novel, Since She's Been Gone. This book promises to be a bestseller right out of the gate, and you do not want to miss out on it. Go pre-order her book. It comes out February 6th, and it is amazing. It is so well written, already getting rave reviews from other best-selling authors in the industry. So go check her out. And don't forget, come back next week and you can hear her tell you all about the book from her own words. So now it's time for you all to go forth and be really happy that season 3 is almost here.